The world has collapsed, and no one knows how it started. Within days, chaos took over the streets. Amid fear and desperation, people looted and fought to survive, as communication and order disappeared. In this scenario, you are the protagonist, and every decision and choice you make will be crucial. At the end of each episode, you will decide the next step, shaping the course of this journey. Which path will you choose? Surviving the collapse in the big city. The journey to a new refuge. Chapter 1. Brief introduction to previous events. After a devastating attempted invasion of the building, Carlos, Miguel, Julia, and a small group of survivors decided to leave what remained of their home and head out in search of safety. The decision wasn't easy, but it seemed like their only chance to escape the constant danger of the city. With supplies running low and tension high, they began their journey to Miguel's country house, located about 50 kilometers from the city. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, don't worry. This is a new chapter in the story, but we invite you to watch the previous episodes to understand everything that led the group to make this difficult decision. As soon as dawn broke, the group left the building, their backpacks filled with essentials: food, water, medicine, and tools. The silence was complete as they moved through the deserted streets, each one alert to any movement. "Stay together. Keep quiet," Carlos whispered, leading the group firmly. The surrounding buildings with broken windows and forced doors reminded everyone of the total collapse that had taken over the city. Julia, holding tightly to the hand of a child who had escaped with them, looked at Miguel. "Are you sure the house is still safe?" Miguel nodded. "I haven't been there in months, but it's in an isolated area. It's our best chance." The idea of searching for a vehicle. After walking a few blocks, Carlos stopped the group for a quick meeting. Walking 50 kilometers with everyone, especially with the kids, will take days. And the longer we're on the road, the higher the risk of being found. Miguel nodded. "We need a car. There's a mechanic shop a couple of blocks from here. If there's still a working vehicle there, it might be our best chance to get to the country house faster." Julia looked at the children and the injured. "This is risky. What if the place has already been looted or occupied?" Carlos thought, for a moment. "Anything's better than being exposed here. Let's try." The group decided to divide tasks. Miguel and Carlos would lead the search for a vehicle while Julia and the others would wait, hidden in an abandoned store nearby, ensuring the safety of the most vulnerable. Arriving at the mechanic shop, Carlos and Miguel found the place partially destroyed. Broken glass and scattered tools indicated it had already been looted, but to their surprise, there was a car parked at the back of the garage. While Miguel checked if the vehicle was running, Carlos stayed alert at the entrance. He noticed fresh footprints in the dust on the floor and scraps of food still fresh. "Miguel, hurry! I think we're not alone here." Miguel finally managed to start the engine. "It's working! Let's grab the group and get out of here." At that moment, footsteps echoed from outside the shop. Two armed men appeared, clearly alerted by the sound of the engine. Carlos quickly pulled Miguel behind a stack of tires. "We don't have time to fight," Carlos whispered. "As soon as they enter, we run to the car and escape." The two invaders began entering the shop, but Carlos and Miguel took advantage of a moment of distraction to sprint towards the car. Miguel accelerated while Carlos, sitting in the passenger seat, kept his eyes on the men who were now chasing them. "We did it!" Miguel shouted as the car sped down the street. They quickly gathered the rest of the group and left. With the entire group on board, the car continued along the main road, slowly distancing itself from the urban area. Tension temporarily eased, and the survivors began to believe they were finally leaving the danger behind. However, as they drove along the road, they spotted something unexpected ahead. A huge blockade made of abandoned cars and debris, blocking their path. Miguel slammed on the brakes, making everyone tense. "I can't believe it," Carlos murmured. "Now what?" Julia looked around. "We need to find another route. Quickly." Miguel sighed. "This is the only way. We'll have to go on foot." Carlos frowned. "This will set us back a lot and expose us even more," Julia reminded him. We have another shorter option. We could cross that park we saw on the map. Chapter 2. As the group analyzed the car blockade, something caught Carlos's attention. He spotted suspicious movement among the abandoned vehicles, quick shadows moving from one side to the other. Miguel noticed it too. "They're there, waiting for us to get closer." Julia swallowed hard, gripping her backpack tightly. "It's an ambush," Carlos nodded, looking at the rest of the group. "We won't give them that opportunity. Let's move away now and head through the woods. It's more dangerous, but at least we'll have some cover from the trees." Everyone quickly agreed, gathered their supplies, and began moving off the road, entering the forest that bordered their path. The transition from the road to the forest was immediate. The air felt more humid, and the sounds of the forest soon replaced the empty echo of the road. Every step on dry leaves and broken branches sounded like an alarm to anyone nearby. Miguel led the group with a small map he held in his hands. "If we head in this direction, we can cut about 15 kilometers to find another road that leads to the house. But we need to stay alert. This park is large and difficult to navigate." They took turns carrying the child in their arms while Julia reassured the others. "Just stay silent. The less noise we make, the better." Carlos kept his weapon ready, walking behind the group to make sure they weren't being followed. He constantly looked behind, aware that the looters might decide to chase them. After a few hours of walking, fatigue began to take its toll. The children were exhausted, and even the adults felt the weight of the supplies. Carlos signaled for them to stop. "Let's rest for a few minutes, but we need to be quick." While they rested, Miguel approached Carlos. "The problem is, we don't know what else might be waiting for us in here. Animals, other groups, or even lost and desperate people." Carlos looked around, assessing the tired faces of his companions. "Yes, but going back isn't an option. On the road, we'd be dead." The silence of the forest was broken by a sharp crack. All eyes quickly turned toward the sound, but there was no sign of immediate movement. Miguel gestured for everyone to remain silent. The tension in the air was palpable. "It's nothing," Carlos whispered, though he knew silence could be more dangerous than any noise. They continued walking, but now more cautiously, eyes sharp for any movement, any shadow between the trees, or the slightest change in the surrounding sounds. After a few more hours of walking, the group saw something in the distance. As they approached, their hearts sank. The bodies of a couple were lying on the ground next to a small clearing. They weren't just dead, they had been tortured. It was obvious their suffering had been prolonged, and they had been abused in unspeakable ways. Julia swallowed hard, panic taking over her face. "My God, what is this? How could a human being do such barbarity?" Carlos moved forward cautiously, his hand firmly on his weapon. "We can't stay here. We need to leave before whoever did this comes back." The horror on everyone's faces was clear, but the reality of this lawless land made them continue. The memory of that cruel scene stuck in their minds, but there was no time for tears or questions. Survival was their only focus. As the hours passed, the group felt the weight of their journey. The sun began to set, and with it came the shadow of fear. They were far from the city now, and the final hours of their walk had become a test of physical and mental endurance. Carlos was exhausted, and the venom from the bee sting was still making its presence felt. His face was swollen, but there was no time to deal with it now. The fear of being followed by looters or encountering more horrors like the bodies they had just seen pushed them to walk faster than their bodies could handle. Julia was already pale, her expression hollow. Each step seemed harder, but the will to reach the end pushed them forward. They couldn't stop. Chapter 3. Survival and the Thread of Hope. Finally, after nearly 19 kilometers of walking, they reached their destination. A small shelter hidden among the dense vegetation, a place Miguel had marked on the map as a safe point. When the shelter came into view, a collective sigh of relief echoed. But that relief was brief. The exhaustion, fear, and the image of the tortured bodies continued to weigh on each of them. What did the future hold for them? The fight for survival was only beginning. The next morning brought a new reality for the group. The shelter, although rustic and simple, became an unlikely but necessary home. There was no more time for hesitation or mourning. The fight for survival was now their only priority. Carlos took charge of organizing the place. He divided the watch, shifts, making it clear that no one could lower their guard, no matter the time of day or night. The forest was full of dangers, and they knew that any mistake could be fatal. Everyone must stay alert, even when resting. No one can trust anyone out here. "We don't know who's out there," Carlos said in a firm and serious voice as he looked at each group member. "Miguel, you and I will go hunting tomorrow. We need fresh meat." Miguel, with the confidence only a born hunter possesses, nodded. He knew the group depended on the skills he had learned throughout his life. Hunting would be vital. Even with food scarce and options limited, Miguel was determined to teach the others what he knew. Nature would be both their ally and their relentless enemy. Training and bonds of friendship. In the following days, Miguel began teaching the basics of tracking and hunting. The children learned to identify footprints and markings on trees, while the adults practiced building traps and handling improvised bows and arrows. The forest, once a place of dread and mystery, became the battlefield in which they would fight for survival. At the same time, the nights of watch helped strengthen the bonds of friendship. Sitting around a campfire, sharing stories from the past in the times before the collapse, the group began to feel like a true unit. The tensions eased as the days went by. The relationships between the members, once marked by fear and distrust, began to transform into something stronger, a bond of survival and camaraderie. Julia, the most sensitive of the group, took care of the children and kept everyone motivated. Her smile, though rare, was a reminder that even in such dark times, human warmth could still exist. Chapter 4. The Revelation of the Collapse on. One of those days of watchfulness, as the old radio, now a relic of a distant past, was turned on once more. A broadcast broke through the silence. The voice on the other end was rough, tired, but carried crucial information. If you're hearing this transmission, the world as we knew it no longer exists. War, driven by political interests and power struggles, spread across nations until no one could stop it. Nuclear and biological bombs devastated cities and entire countries. But there is a resistance, a union of forces among the survivors, fighting to restore peace. The fight is far from over, but hope still exists. Those words, spoken with a quiet hardness, fell upon the group like an avalanche. For a moment everyone was silent, absorbing the weight of what they had just heard. The reality of what had happened, and what was still to come, hit them with overwhelming force. The world would never be the same. Not anymore. But maybe, just maybe, there was still a future. A thread of hope. "There's a chance," murmured Carlos, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "The resistance is gaining ground. They'll restore peace. But until then, we have to survive." The others, despite the heaviness in their hearts, felt a flicker of relief, a new perspective. It was no longer just about surviving the moment, but now about having a reason to continue, a chance for a better future, even if it was far off. Miguel, who had been silent until then, looked at the group and spoke with newfound confidence. "Let's get ready. Hunt, learn more, take care of one another. When the opportunity comes, we'll be prepared." The group, now more united than ever, began to plan their days with a renewed sense of determination. They wouldn't be caught off guard again. Every move was calculated, every decision carefully considered. Even as they battled fear, hunger, and uncertainty, they knew they had become more than just survivors. They had become a family. The end, or the beginning. While the forest continued its life, indifferent to the chaos unfolding in the world outside, the group prepared to face whatever came their way. There was no way to know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Together, they were stronger than they were alone. And even though the world was fractured, hope, however fragile, kept them standing. And so, the last chapter closed, not with an ending, but with a new beginning. The fight for survival, for freedom, and for a better future was only just beginning. Did you enjoy this story? Now find out the other possible endings to this journey. See what would have happened if you had made a different choice. Option 1. Go back and stay with Raoul and the rest of the group in the building, where food is available, fortifying the defenses and turning the place into a true bastion of survival. Option 2. Leave with the group at dawn, facing the dangers of the streets in the hope of finding a safer refuge outside the city. For this, choose the video on the right. What will Carlos's next step be? And before you go, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment on how you would have survived. Don't miss the next videos. Your choice could change everything.